There it is. All right, it is 5:01. Let's call the February 16th Quality of Life Committee meeting to order. If I could please get a roll call.
Yes, ma'am. Chair Councillor Cassette.
Here.
Councillor Villarreal.
Present.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Present.
Councillor Lee Garcia.
I'm here.
Councillor Amanda Chavez.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on to approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
Sorry, Madam Chair. Good evening.
Do not
everyone.
have any changes. I'm sorry.
No.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any changes from the committee? And if not, what is the wishes of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Mike Garcia, second from Councilwoman Villarreal. Can I please get a roll call?
Yes, ma'am. Chair Cassette.
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Lee Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chavez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. Moving on to the consent agenda, are there any items to be pulled? And if not, can I get a motion?
Move to approve.
Second. Okay. Motion from Councilwoman Villarreal, second from Councilor Chavez. Roll call, please.
Chair Cassette.
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Lee Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chavez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. Moving on to approval of the minutes from the January 19th Quality of Life Committee meeting. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes.
Thank you. And any changes from the committee?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Thank you so much. Got a motion from Councilor Michael Garcia, second from Councilwoman Villarreal. And if we can get a roll call.
Chair Cassette.
Yes.
Councillor Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Michael
Yes.
Garcia. Councillor Lee Garcia.
Sorry. Yes.
Councillor Chavez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. I didn't hear Councilor Mike Garcia's vote, but I'm assuming that we heard a yes from him.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I believe
Say
so.
yes.
Make sure we give you a chance to vote, Councilor.
I think
I
I
believe
voted for him.
I called you, didn't I? Yes, okay.
All right, thank you so much. Moving on to presentations. Our first presentation, we have the tree canopy inventory update, a project of the City of Santa Fe Municipal Tree Board and the New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service. We have Melissa McDonald, the Parks Division Director, presenting, as well as Athena Besher. Please correct me on your last name pronunciation. And I believe there might be some other individuals here, but I will pass it over to Director McDonald.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman, Councilors. We're here tonight to update you on our tree inventory. I know that there are some new councilors here, so this is a great opportunity for us to kind of share some great news that the Municipal Tree Board has been working on for several years. As the Chairwoman has mentioned, we have Athena Besher, who has been on the tree board and also a representative of the Cooperative Extension Service, as well as Ryan Brentson, which is a representative of the Municipal Tree Board. So I'd like to turn this over to Ryan so that he can update you on the project, and then Athena will give a quick presentation. Thank you so much.
Hi, councilors. I'm Ryan Brentison. I'm an ISA certified arborist, owner of Very Good Tree Service, and a member of the Santa Fe Municipal Tree Board. I'm here to introduce you to the Santa Fe Public Spaces Tree Inventory Project and how the Municipal Tree Board supports it. We started the inventory in 2016, and so far we have just over 2,600 trees in the database. We primarily collaborate with the Santa Fe Master Gardeners, public citizen scientists, and local arborists. We also work with clubs such as the Rotary Club. It's volunteer ran, and we meet twice a month through the spring and fall. The Municipal Tree Board supports the project financially by recommending the City Parks Division fund the software subscription. The Municipal Tree Board also serves as liaison to the city parks and updates them on trees that may need assistance as the inventory progresses. We also guide the selection and direction of parks to survey, as well as supporting the education of volunteers, such as tree identification. I'm going to pass this on to Athena Bashur, who is the coordinator for the Master Gardener Program and the primary coordinator of this project. Thanks.
Athena, you are on mute. And you're still muted, actually.
Sorry about that. I
Sure.
needed to stop sharing my screen in order to find that button. Well, thank you all again for allowing me to speak today about the tree inventory project and the value of trees in our community. So as you know, trees offer great benefits to our community, and they cool the air. Their shade protects the longevity of roads and buildings by reducing potholes and cracked surfaces. As green infrastructure, they cool asphalt, reducing the heat caused by urban concentrations of the built environment, otherwise known as the urban heat island effect. Trees act as air purifiers and humidifiers and provide more of these services as they grow. They help control stormwater and actually help regulate rainfall, reducing drought. The moisture released from trees helps improve humidity levels and cools the air, further reducing that heat island effect. They provide immense values to physical and mental health. They reduce cardiovascular disease risk by reducing air pollution. Biometrics such as blood pressure, lipid levels, obesity, diabetes are all improved when people live around trees. Clean air reduces complications associated with respiratory illness. Clean water reduces gastrointestinal illness, thyroid dysfunction, and certain cancers. Being around nature reduces post-traumatic stress disorder, improves immunity, and essentially makes people happier. So they also reduce asthma rates in young children by up to 25%. And in a 10-year study completed in 2021, over 5 million people were surveyed by the Kaiser Permanente healthcare system. And there is definitely a robust connection between trees and health at the rate of about $400 per person per year, which for our city is equivalent to about $28 million a year. Also, better trees, more trees create faster rates of healing, lower stress levels and anxiety levels, and in general, help a lot to make ourselves a more livable city. And it's for this reason that the city of Santa Fe, in conjunction with the Parks Division, has created the Tree Smart Santa Fe initiative. And this is a website that provides a direct link to the tree inventory project in conjunction with resources about trees and their value. And just as one example of the initiative, dying cottonwood had to be removed from Cornell Park, and 25 trees have been planted to replace the removal of this dying cottonwood based on the ecosystem services that one large tree provided. Trees also are placemakers. They tighten community bonds and they provide shade, which encourages gathering and relaxing and exercising. They're pillars in our community, strengthening the neighborhood connections through shared experiences over time. And these elements help define what is place and convert space into an essential part of our community. Here's just a picture of that gathering around that Cornell cottonwood tree. So inventoried trees receive care, and that is done because the information about what trees are doing well allows the Parks Division to quickly make decisions about hazardous limb failures, remediating situations quickly and efficiently, and sending the right tools with the right crews to perform a task. It also teaches community volunteers how to care for trees by showing them tree by tree which ones are doing well and in which conditions they succeed. Additionally, they allow us to analyze this information. So that allows us to value the trees from an ecological standpoint, as well as quantify this and knowing where our diversity lies. Overall, our trees are doing really, really well in terms of the diversity that we see in the park system. And this little pie chart just shows an example of which trees are doing, where trees are and which species they are. So here's another example from Las Acequias Park. And it's a beautiful park. If you haven't been there, it's constantly in use by its surrounding residents. And this shows the trees and based on color and also their size distribution based on their diameter, which was measured. We use tree plotter software, which is wonderful. We originally started this project in 2016 with paper and pencil, and it was a horrible, laborious way of doing it. And thanks to the Parks Division and the Municipal Tree Board, we now have tree plotter software, which allows us to instantly be able to provide the data to the Parks Division, and through simple queries by toggling in the legend, supervisors at the Parks Division can quickly display what needs to be done at the citywide level. We've done 27 parks so far, and we're intending to keep on going, and it's really a great initiative. We also have brought this information into iTree Echo, which is a software that was developed by the USDA Forest Service, Northern Research Center. And this allows us to analyze the data and provide these in-depth assessments. Here we see condition classes based on not only just trees, but also the parks that they're in. So crews can see where the trees are doing fair or poor. And essentially, this is going to allow us and allow the Parks Division to be able to see which parks need a lot of care, because essentially we want these trees to grow into these big pillars of the community that will help provide the services over a long period of time. And that requires care and knowing which ones need that care. So just by looking at this one chart, we can see which ones are in fair condition and poor and critical and dying. Essentially, though, what it comes down to is not a pretty picture in terms of the health. And based on our current conditions of our trees, unfortunately, if we do not improve the care of our trees, over half the trees we have now that we've inventoried will have died within 30 years. And this graph just shows that unpleasant picture of what is forecasted. The data also can show us where the size distribution, and that size gives us some hints about age, because you can't plant a really large tree without an incredible amount of expense and vulnerability to the root systems. And this distribution it shows us here that we have a lot of younger trees, but that the older trees tend to die off in our communities. So what we want to see is that these 6 to 12-inch trees become the subsequent larger trees and heritage trees of our future. And by supporting them, we can help them grow. And we can also see from graphs what the carbon storage, the carbon accumulation or sequestration, and other values as well, and such as air pollutants, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter. So those are just some of the variability of services that we can now quantify based on these data points that we've found. And all trees store carbon, but the larger hubs, as seen by this graph based on parks that we've inventoried so far, the larger parks are storing more carbon. And so essentially what that tells us is that if we can have some larger hubs of 50 acres or more, and more available throughout the city with small stepping stones throughout, this model is not only at the heart of wildlife habitat planning, but it also provides the best way we can grow our trees, where they're not in small spaces, but have room for their root systems to grow. And so far we've done 27 trees, and the more we do, the more the data becomes more useful to you all and to the park system as well. And this just shows which parks we've done so far. And we're going to be keeping on going, especially with the rail yard park and with districts 3 and 4. We'd like to complete districts 3 and 4 this year. Prompted by extensive international research about the value of trees and the needing to simplify the messages of urban forestry for environmental equity, Dr. Cecil Kanaidenijk has recently developed this 3-30-300 rule, really catchy phrase, which basically states that we should see 3 trees from every window, that we should live in communities with 30% canopy cover and be within 300 meters or 300 yards from every green space. And this just shows some volunteers in front of the City Hall as we were inventorying this little pinon that's right by that window. So hopefully you all can look outside your windows and see 3 trees, whether they're yours or your neighbors or a park nearby. This 3 trees concept relates directly to the individual person and the value of urban nature. Having trees around our home impacts not only our energy efficiency of the home, the cooling of the sidewalks and the streets, but also our health and our sense of this well-being. So seeing trees outside our window increases rates of healing, for example, after surgery, helps children focus in schools, and reduces cortisol levels. So reducing anxiety as some of us at home or working from our homes or working in offices. Surveys would be an easy way to find out if people are lacking this distribution at the individual level. The 30% canopy cover has been linked to optimal health, and this has been researched for a while now, and some people say 20%, but now the conclusion is that really optimal benefit is at that 30% level. And by looking at the neighborhood, we can begin to recognize where canopy reaches optimal for each neighborhood, but it's quite a bit different between neighborhoods. And that's not only because of equity, but it's also because of how Santa Fe is. So we have our hubs on either side, and those districts that are closer to the Sangre de Cristos, of course, are going to have a higher canopy just because of the forest and the remnant forest in the city. Here we see a map, and looking at the map here, the parks the park systems, each of these, as well as the park inventories that we have inventoried. So here we see that this park right here is at 17% canopy cover, and this particular dot is for a Douglas fir. So we can see that, and this is through National Land Cover data. This little greened area. So where the hub is, that's where we're going to see. Over here in the districts 3 and 4, we're starting to see a lot less canopy cover, and several of the points from doing a collection of 20 points per district and then averaging those, I came up with quite a disparaging look at the equity of tree cover in each district. but the reality is that's just based on very random pointing and selecting. So, and this is also based on just 20 points. But if we wanted to hone in on what a particular location, we can begin to see that particular location shows this percentage of canopy. Another way to assess canopy cover is looking at the iTree canopy system, and that's using actual points. So in these, the software used random sampling, and I selected 100 definitions of what those samplings were, and we came up with quite a bit different as an overall general overview for Santa Fe. But one thing that's really significant about this that we can see in this graph right here on land cover is this 34% is for grassland and herbaceous coverage. And that just points to the value of that lower quadrant where we have that major wildlife hub of grasslands in our southern region. And this provides immense stormwater benefits in our southern region, as well as habitat for grassland birds, and acts as a stepping stone between the two other mountain ranges. And this is showing at a general level, including everyone, with 100 points, which isn't a lot of points, but we can see that the tree canopy is much higher than using the national land cover data. But looking at the neighborhood level, I think that's really where we're at in terms of this 30% canopy cover at the neighborhood level, is using this tree equity score, which is a web-based software program through American Forest. And here, this highlighted area here, we can see that the tree equity score is 55%. And it's utilizing not only canopy cover, but also the various priority indices that can help us. And so this canopy cover is 4%, with a canopy goal hoping to reach 18, whereas the tree equity score for this Northeast region, which is within the nestled in the Northeastern hills, is at 23%, and it has an equity score of 100. So that just starts to show where the disparity exists in our communities, and being able to analyze that at a more neighborhood level. So you can also see these online as you choose and pick out whichever neighborhood you'd like. So finally, the 300 rule relates to that 300 yards from any public space. And that's equivalent to about a 10-minute walk or a 0.2 miles. And this is just using a buffering tool using ArcGIS. And we can visualize which neighborhoods are outside of that benchmark of 300 yards from a public space. So when we begin to look a little closer and add in a parcel level, we can begin to see where density exists and where there's a lack of connection to some of these spaces. And these dots right here show our trees. So there we see Cornell Park and the buffer of the land and some people. So we can use these tools to help us reach these benchmarks of the 300 rule. And by keeping track of this and figuring it out and looking at all of it in conjunction with one another, we can start to understand a little bit better about why these areas are influencing the hotter parts of town and how the urban heat island effect can be reduced. Hopefully that this will help you all make decisions about where the value of trees needs to be higher and how we can plan smart in order to do that. Trees in these zones, like this is Swan Park, of course, are getting selected for being in this hotter area, and and utilizing stormwater resources as a way of helping them grow. By keeping track of our trees, we can, of course, help them grow. And it's when they get really large and hold those pillars that they can begin to care for us after all these years of us caring for them. National Arbor Day is the last Friday in April. And I want to encourage you all to celebrate with the Parks Division on April 29th. And here's just a picture of last year's Tree City USA Arbor Day celebration with the mayor and Melissa as well. So please join the parks this year in a month for the Arbor Day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will stop sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. There everybody is. Councilwoman Villarreal. Apparently I can't talk. I apologize.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted to just get in my questions before I have to excuse myself here in a bit. So I just wanted to send appreciation to Athena and also Ryan. Athena, I really appreciate your passion on the topic. I know you've worked really hard on this and with little recognition. So I just wanted to thank you for all that you've been doing. And this presentation was extremely thorough. So thank you. I think it's an important topic, and also just the tedious data gathering is very obvious how you've taken the time to make an effort to make sure the tree inventory is accurate. Remind me if the inventory is just on city property and rights of way, or are you all doing an inventory? Yeah, I guess I was assuming it was just all on city rights of way and property. Is that correct?
That's right, Councilwoman. The official title of the project is the Santa Fe Public Spaces Tree Inventory Project. And we began and we're still continuing in the park system. So
Great.
Hopefully we can wrap the park system up in 7 years. So in the next few years is what our goal is that every 7 years we'd be able to assess the trees.
Great.
And
I
hopefully
know.
move on to parks
Yeah.
or other locations on public spaces.
There's a lot, and you'll probably have new data at that point. The data you'll have to update it after the period of time when you finish. But I think it's just important to have a baseline. I'm also concerned about the tree health that you've been talking about, particularly in District 1 and downtown and in the plaza area. A lot of those older trees, people want to preserve them, yet many of them are diseased and people don't realize that. So I'm curious if you all had thought about with this awareness to let people know about what disease has done to older trees and what we're going to have to possibly do to mitigate that, which may end up being taking down our lovely trees that we've seen growing up. So I'm just curious if you all have had, and Melissa, you can weigh in too, like what the plan is, because I think it would be good to do an awareness around that, of not just in the plaza, but there's different areas where we have older trees that we may eventually that are diseased, but people don't recognize it because they don't see it. They just see the green up and the beautiful canopies, but they have serious problems. So what are we doing to mitigate that? I know there's some things that we can do to prevent the dying off of those diseased trees, but just curious your thoughts on that.
Councilwoman, councilors, that's an excellent question. And I really want to recognize Athena Bashur and the Municipal Tree Board for the recent educational experience we had at Cornell Park, because that tree was a beautiful tree and it was very hard to take down because people saw the big green canopy, as you say, but the tree was very unhealthy. And Athena did an excellent job of really educating the community. We had 30 people living in the neighborhood. Councilor Garcia was there participating, And, people came very upset about this tree coming down, but by the time they understood what was going on and how it was diseased, and Athena and the other municipal tree board folks kind of explained what was going on, we got very good response for what we needed to do. So I think that this is a change in how we're approaching this type of thing in the Parks Division. We want to educate people about diseases in trees, show them ways that they can maintain their own homes and how we're doing it in our parks. And this is very important to understanding tree health, because when you have these types of situations, you can prune things out, but not always. Sometimes you have to take them out. And we, of course, do not use chemicals very much in the city. So we're very limited in what we can do. So it's very, very important that people understand how to identify problems and how we might have to solve them. I think I've turned it quickly over to the committee to see if there's anything else that you want to touch on. Maybe Ryan?
Yeah, I think you covered that really well. Basically, drought and compacted soils are probably our biggest issues. I know one time, I believe the plaza was aerated, but that's something that probably could help with all trees. When soils are compacted, you don't get air, moisture, or organic material getting down to the root hairs that actually absorb everything. And so just bettering soils, water, which is hard to say when we are in a drought and don't have lots of water, but that's what our trees need. And when we do water, it's going deeper. It's getting water 18 inches under the soil. Drip and sprinklers don't really do much for trees. And so it's using the water that we have wisely and doing that. Part of the IPM strategy is using pesticides as a last resort sometimes. So that would be great to work on some of our European elm scale on the American elms downtown. But other than that, it's bettering our soil and moisture.
And counselors, I want to let you know that the Municipal Tree Board has been instrumental in terms of letting us training our crews. So they are volunteering to train our crews in how to do better health. And this is like just a very important committee to our Parks Division, because we have professionals on this committee. All this research is being utilized in a way so that when they go out and have a tree that's ill, we can actually have our crews get around the tree and really understand how to improve it. So I just really wanted to bring this group to you so you could, understand the great work that they're doing for us.
Yes, we appreciate it greatly. I think the knowledge sharing is important, especially because, a lot of us really see the importance of the IPM ordinance and why that community members value that. It's just that this last resort possibility is something that I've heard from tree experts that we may need to consider for downtown trees. And so that's why I'm trying to be ahead of the conversation so that we can be proactive and communicate it ahead of time so that it doesn't explode into some kind of miscommunicated effort that the city's wanting to spray pesticides all over town. So I just want to nip that in the bud before that actually happens, and that we can work on something in a communication plan about how we're going to move forward and prioritize too. So I don't know if you all have a plan for prioritizing some of those sick and diseased trees on city property. If there's a plan to start moving forward, if maybe you could share that a little bit, Melissa, about what staff is planning on doing, given this information that the volunteer board has provided.
Yes, Councilwoman. So at this point, we have not necessarily moved toward the absolute application of pesticides or herbicides. Right now, we're really focusing on identifying the trees that need help, doing particular type of pruning, removing situations that would make the situation worse. But yes, that is very much of a foresight. When it really explodes, we may have to resort to that. So we are working toward education just as much as we have these events and we explain why things are going on. it is absolutely the last resort. And Victor Lucero, who is our IPM person at the city, is really an excellent person to like educate our community on this. So as we move forward, we'll keep doing that for sure.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all again. I appreciate all of the information and all the hard work that you've done to provide us with details and data. Thank you.
And counselors, I do want to let you know, we will be having a event on Arbor Day, which is going to be Friday, April 29th, and you'll be hearing all about it, but we do hope you'll come and join us.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Councilwoman. Any other questions from other members of the committee? If not, I just had, I believe only a couple questions. I think you mentioned that all those GIS maps are on the website so that we can go in and dig in a little deeper. Is that correct?
So the website has the tree plotter information, and then this is through the City of Santa Fe's GIS hub. So if you have permissions, then if you log into your ArcGIS system, there are a few layers on these maps that require a subscription. So if you don't have an ArcGIS subscription with the city, then or on your own, then they may not be available, especially that national land cover data set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to revise this just to take out anything that requires a subscription so it can become publicly available. And I can forward that link. But the link that you received in your initial draft packet, that may require you to have a subscription in order to see some of the maps, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yeah, I believe that as counselors, we do have ability to access that, but I understand for the public, it would be nice to see what they can also be seeing just on their own and be digging into that data a bit. So one thing that I found really interesting was this tree equity piece. And I know right now we're mapping the parks, but there really does seem to be, there are disparities, especially when we're looking at districts 3 and 4. And are we actively working to reduce the inequities while we're plotting the data, or is the idea to plot and then start filling in?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Yes, we are beginning to plant trees, so we're not waiting to get all the data. Eventually, we do want all the data, but we are proceeding with planting trees where appropriate, and that's going to continue. So in our budget, you'll start to see more requests for that type of thing. But yes, and I really like the fact that we have the ability to see these tree things. So I know that Athena says that you need subscriptions for certain things, but if you go to that Tree Smart Santa Fe, you can pull it up and see quite a bit of information. So I just want to encourage the public to look at that Tree Smart Santa Fe and click on that link. The other thing I wanted to mention was that we are participating in a Google a tree inventory canopy cover, which will be coming forward through our sustainability task force. And that's going to take all this data that we're collecting, we're giving it to Google, and they're going to be coming up with a canopy look at our city, which will start to show that citywide canopy cover. And I think we'll start seeing some of those inequities there. So there's a whole bunch of really exciting things moving forward around this issue.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I really love the utilization of data and mapping for this. I think it's not something that somebody would initially think of as a natural use of data, but it really does work so incredibly well and really gives us that very important picture of how this looks throughout the city, and helps us address it. Because as Athena mentioned at the beginning, all those really important aspects of trees and what they do for the climate and for our health. And so I'm really grateful for this project, and thank you all so much for this work. It's really thorough, really impressive, and really quite important. So thank you all. If there weren't any other questions from the committee, then thank you all so much, and we will move on to our next presentation.
Thank you.
Getting my agenda up. Okay, so we do have a early childcare update. Rachel Kutcher and Julie Sanchez are here to present.
Hi, good evening, Chairwoman Casa and members of the Quality of Life Committee. I'm Julie Sanchez with the Youth and Family Services Division, and I'm really excited to introduce Rachel Kutcher, who's been doing a lot of work around the early childcare arena for the city of Santa Fe. And so she's got some great updates to share tonight with you all. And I'm actually having some pretty severe internet stabilization issues. So I'm going to have my screen turned off, and Rachel may also have to do that as well. But I just wanted to give you all a heads up. So Rachel, you go ahead and have the floor.
Thank you, Chairwoman and counselors, for having me to present this evening. And I'm just going to share a PowerPoint. Okay. So I've been working on a landscape analysis and strategy research for the city on early childhood education and care. And what I'm presenting this evening is really just the first phase of this work. I was asked to look at some of the areas initially that may relate to ARPA funding, but there'll be some additional analysis and strategy work coming in the next few months. And I'll just also note that there, in addition to this PowerPoint, is also a report that's been posted to PrimeGov, and so much more detailed than the PowerPoint and what I have time to present. So I'd also just encourage you to look at that. So the main themes that I want to cover are just the impact of the pandemic on the childcare industry, challenges that families have been experiencing both before and during the pandemic, accessing early childhood education and care, especially for infants and toddlers, and challenges for providers, both pre-pandemic and continuing into the pandemic, especially around staffing and building capacity for home-based providers. So there was a September 2020 cost study that estimated increases in cost of care due to the state-based emergency child care regulations. So in a lot of states, at the beginning of the pandemic, they implemented these regulations in addition to normal state regulations for child care, things around additional sanitation requirements, reduced capacity below their normal licensed capacity, reduced classroom sizes, and really trying to isolate classrooms to limit the spread of COVID-19, so not being able to share staffing or supplies or spaces. And so for New Mexico, they estimated that the average cost of care for centers increased by 88%. This was the 5th highest nationally. And that was about a 77% increase for infants and toddlers and 103% for 3- and 4-year-olds. Infant and toddler care was still more expensive than care for 3- and 4-year-olds, but the fact that 3- and 4-year-old care increased so much is also really significant because normally, without those restrictions, there are much higher staffing child to staff ratios for 3- and 4-year-olds, and this typically helps to sort of subsidize the much higher costs for infants and toddlers. For home-based providers, there was also an average cost increase of 67%. And these costs were costs to the provider. So they, couldn't double the cost of tuition for families. Child care assistance reimbursement rates are set. And so this is a cost that the providers were taking on. The state did try to help mitigate some of those costs. There was a $250 differential per child care assistance contract for providers that was paid for a little over a year. More recently, there's been some stabilization grants for providers that have hopefully sort of in retrospect helped to stabilize some of those costs as well. There was also a survey conducted June to July of 2021 that found that New Mexico centers and home-based providers are operating at about 72% of pre-pandemic capacity on average. And you're going to hear me say in a couple of minutes that we have an issue of lack of supply of early childhood education and care in Santa Fe. And so I know that the fact that providers are operating under capacity may seem contradictory. It really isn't, because the enrollment for centers and home-based providers has been really volatile during the pandemic. Initially, because there were all of these restrictions to help mitigate the spread of COVID-19. And then, there was also family income losses that caused families to pull children out of care. There have been staffing shortages, which I'll talk more about. And then those staffing shortages have also caused many programs to have to reduce their hours, which doesn't always fit families' work and school schedules as well. And then families have also at times been concerned about having their children in care due to potential exposure to COVID-19. And so that last piece may mitigate as a little bit as we move towards vaccination eligibility for that age group. So there's kind of two pieces to hold simultaneously. There's the fact that the instability of enrollment has really affected revenues and the stability of the industry. And as we look towards the long term, we need to think about both stabilizing and building more care capacity in Santa Fe. So there was a huge impact on employment in the sector as well. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was a 33% decline in childcare sector employment nationally. A lot of centers closed temporarily, some permanently. Reduced capacity sometimes meant having to lay off some of the workforce. And we haven't really recovered that well from that. So June to July 2021, 61% of New Mexico child care centers were experiencing staffing shortages, which caused them to serve fewer children. They had longer wait lists, were unable to open classrooms, and had to reduce their operating hours. And as of August 2021, 6 centers had permanently closed in Santa Fe. And as a result, we lost 41 licensed slots for children under age 2 and 183 for children over age 2. There's a few different ways to think about the economic contribution of early childhood education and care in New Mexico. So first of all, there is the direct economic contributions of the industry. It's about $244 million in direct revenue, $123 million in employee compensation, and nearly 8,000 jobs. And this is just directly generated by the industry, not counting the spillover effects that the industry has on other industries. But because we have shortages of care, there's also economic losses. And so in a 2019 to 2020 survey, so partly before the pandemic, over 10% of New Mexico parents or their family members with a child age 0 to 5 had to leave a job, didn't take a job, change jobs due to childcare challenges. And as of October 2020, nationally, 42% of women with children under 2 had left the workforce during the pandemic. There's a great cost estimation model done by the Bipartisan Policy Center that looks at the gaps in care and then their economic losses that result in them. And so Santa Fe County, they estimate, has a gap of about 2,080 needed childcare slots just for children age 5 and under. And based on household income losses, business productivity losses and turnover, and lost tax revenues, they estimate the total economic impact of that gap to be between 45 million and 69 million a year. And then if you just take that 1 year and look at the accumulated losses over 10 years, it's about 76 to 117 million. So it has a really significant impact on our economy. Families report struggling with access to care. In July 2021, Growing Up New Mexico surveyed families with young children, and 57% said that they need more or a lot more care than what they're currently accessing. 35% are struggling with affordability. 43% didn't know whether or not they were eligible for child care assistance subsidies, which are the primary way that the state helps to low-income families to access childcare affordably. And there's a real disparity by language for this. So 69% of Spanish speakers and 62% of English-Spanish bilingual speakers didn't know whether or not they were eligible versus 28.5% of English speakers. So we really want to look at increasing awareness and access to that program across the community, but especially looking at supporting Spanish speakers in that. Statewide survey results show very similar feedback. 74% of families in a statewide survey said they or someone they know has struggled to find convenient, affordable care. 38% don't feel that early childhood programs are affordable and accessible. And in that statewide analysis, there was also a lot of qualitative data collection. One of the themes from that was that there's really a need to improve communication to families about available early childhood programs, eligibility criteria, and ensuring equitable language access. One other thing I want to mention here is that I've heard quite a bit from folks in the early childhood sector that currently it seems that the wait times for review and approval of child care assistance applications have gotten longer, maybe due to some of the same staffing shortages we're seeing everywhere else. And so for lower income families, what will happen is that they'll get offered a slot, their child will get offered a seat in an early childhood program, and they'll apply for child care assistance, but they'll often be nervous to go ahead and accept that seat before they find out whether or not their child care assistance has been approved. Technically, it can be put into effect retroactively, but if they don't know if they're going to get approved or for how much, they're fearful of owing the program money after the fact that they can't afford. And so they're sometimes not taking those seats. Early childhood programs will often try to work with families to hold that seat for a little while, but they're losing revenue when they're holding open seats like that. And so they can only hold that for so long. And so it's disproportionately impacting lower income families who are less secure in being able to accept that seat and know they have the assistance that they need to pay for it. So a few recommendations to support families. The Connect Navigation Network is a really great broad network already, but because it's so broad, not all of the navigators working in different organizations necessarily have a deep knowledge of early childhood systems. So thinking about how the city can include in navigation some more intensive and specific support navigating early childhood, whether that's directly employing navigators or early childhood specific contracts with community partners, thinking about support for families and especially Spanish speakers and learning about their different options, applying for programs and getting support applying to child care assistance. And then flexible funding can also be really helpful here. So direct cash assistance enables families to decide how they want to use that funding, including for early childhood education and care. Flexible funds could also be administered by navigators, which can help families fill in gaps, whether that's a family who's waiting for a spot to open up for them in a registered or licensed program, whether that's somebody who needs care during hours that licensed and registered programs are not open, or families who would just prefer to have family members and friends take care of their children. And then that could also be connected to navigation to help those families learn about how their family members or friends could become a registered provider to care for their children and receive child care assistance reimbursements. And then flexible funds administered by navigators or early childhood education and care programs could also enable a family who's waiting to hear about their child care assistance approval to take an open care seat that's offered to them, knowing that if they don't get full contract or there's issues with the approval, that they won't be in debt to that program. I just want to touch briefly on early childhood workforce as well. So even pre-pandemic, nearly 70% of directors and managers of early childhood programs said they were having a hard time hiring teachers. Nearly half said teachers applying for positions in their programs were often not qualified. And some research around certificates and degrees in New Mexico institutions of higher education showed that while there has been an increase in certificates in early childhood education granted in the last few years, that the number of associate's degrees awarded between 2014-15 and the 2017-18 academic years has really stagnated around 200 annually. And that education trajectory is really important both for ensuring we've got qualified teachers in the classrooms and also as we look at low wage issues in trying to build a wage scale that's really livable for the early childhood workforce. It's a really low wage profession. 50% of early childhood professionals make less than $30,000 a year. That includes 81% of early childhood professionals with an associate's degree. 80% with a bachelor's degree are making less than $45,000 a year. And the lowest paid in the workforce really are our licensed and registered home-based providers. 58% of them are making less than $15,000 a year. So it's no surprise that 63% of early childhood professionals are reporting having trouble paying their bills. And many of them also don't receive benefits from their employers. And so many also are relying on different public assistance programs to make ends meet. Home-based providers, because they've got those very limited revenues, are sometimes struggling to afford basic fees and physical improvements that would enable unregistered providers to become registered, registered to become licensed, or licensed providers to expand their capacity. So these are simple things: fees for local permits that they need for licensing, background checks, home visit fees, I guess it's really a home inspection fee, and the costs of fencing and outdoor play spaces or outdoor equipment for outdoor play spaces, which are required for licensure, as well as other small upgrades to their indoor and outdoor spaces. There are a couple of programs that are in early implementation or development in Santa Fe right now that are seeking to address some of these issues. So Growing Up New Mexico, Partnership for Community Action in West, they started a statewide home-based business accelerator in January of this year. 12 sessions focused on business and entrepreneurial development. There is a small stipend for the providers to complete program requirements. And about half the cohort are new providers, and about half are current providers interested in expanding their businesses. Because it's statewide, there are just a few providers in this cohort from Santa Fe, but Growing Up New Mexico is looking ahead towards building a Santa Fe-based cohort as well. Plans for this are still tentative, but they told me that they're thinking that an April 2022 launch may be possible, initially with 6 to 12 providers with room for growth. And it'll build on that statewide accelerator curriculum, but also include additional longer term supports and coaching. It'll also include those provider stipends, and that piece they have partial funding for, but really do need additional funding. And then the Early Childhood Steering Committee has been discussing quite a bit that there are a lot of challenges for the workforce in going from sort of the initial credentials to an associate's degree. They're often working full-time while in school and often have other family responsibilities. And so degree completion has taken a long time. So Santa Fe Community College is working to develop an early childhood teacher apprenticeship program. The first cohort would launch in January of 2023 with about 20 apprentices, and it would accelerate associate's degree completion to 2 to 3 years. It would be registered as a state apprenticeship and would also train experienced teachers who are already in early childhood classrooms as mentors. So it's really helping to build our leadership network and our education network for providers through a partnership with the Early Childhood Mentor Network. So just a couple of recommendations for supporting early childhood education and care for workforce. First of all is the potential for wage supplements. There's a small wage supplement program that occurs through the state on a regular basis. There's more information on that in the report. There were just a couple of pandemic-related wage supplements. There was a 3 months of payment between April and June of 2020 for professionals in centers that were open during that time. There was a $1,500 one-time incentive payment in November of 2021. But what we're really hearing is that wages are a big issue in terms of these workforce shortages. And so while that needs a longer term solution, some wage supplements in the shorter term could help stabilize the industry during the pandemic. Supporting early childhood workforce and business development initiatives that are underway could really help build our workforce and help build towards more home-based and registered home care in Santa Fe. And then thinking about the possibility of flexible funding or forgivable microloans for home-based providers to help them become registered or to go from registered to licensed or to expand their care capacity. So that's all for my presentation. Councilwoman or Chairwoman and councilors, I'd be happy to stand for questions now if you have any for me.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the report. It was very thorough. So if y'all haven't had an opportunity to read it, it's there's a lot of information there. So thank you so much. Are there any questions from members of the committee at this time? If not, I do have one that actually was more mentioned in the report. And it had to do with the New Mexico pre-K grants. And if I am understanding them correctly, my guess is that these are the grants that, for example, allow like the Connie School, the Santa Fe Community College Early Learning Center. Those are those grant programs that allow for those free spots. First Presbyterian, I think, is the other one, as well as within the public schools. Am I correct?
Correct. Yes. So there's a public school side of that funding, as well as a competitive grant process for community-based providers to access pre-K funding.
Okay. And I guess what I'm curious about is there was recently conversation at my son's school. Some of the parents were asking about, well, how do we become one of these? I think there's actually 4 schools. So I think the Children's Garden in El Dorado is another one in the Santa Fe area that has some of these grants. And they were curious, and you might not have the answer to this now, but as we're doing further exploration, how the different community provider schools would be able to apply. And actually, when they spoke with the director of our school, which is a well-established preschool that has been in operation, I mean, like since I was 3, that she was unaware of this program and of this grant. And so I was curious about the awareness among the providers in the community, as well as what that process looks like and how we also might be able to help local providers apply for those grants to bring more of that money into Santa Fe if it's available at the state level. Do you happen to have any information on what that grant process is looking like, if we've tapped it out?
That's a great question, Chairwoman. I don't know some of the answers to that. I can say that there is an annual, I believe it's annual, but there is a grant process that's regularly occurring through early childhood education and care department. In terms of increasing awareness of that, that's a really interesting point, that if there are providers that aren't even aware that that's available, thinking about a role for the city in that. And I don't know all of the details of that RFP and grant making process, but that's certainly something that I can research more in the next phase of this work.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. And I'd also be really curious with the infusion of dollars that the state is putting into early childhood education and care, if there might be more opportunities for those spots. And I know that you and I have had this conversation of both how might the city support, but also how do we really strategize to pull down those state dollars? At the time we were talking federal dollars. We'll see. But at least those state dollars and really bring them into our community, and what those mechanisms might look like, and how the city might be a support in whether it's communications or processes or partnering with community actors who are already really acting in this space to maximize the finances that would be available at the state is going to be really crucial. So thank you for getting more information on that one. I don't believe I had any other questions. Did anybody else at this time? No. Well, thank you again so much, Rachel. Thank you for the report. I look forward to the next iterations of it and the next editions, and we really appreciate you being here. And thank you, Julie, with your camera off.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are past everything on consent. We do not have any discussion items, no executive session. Matters from staff.
Oops. Madam Chair, members of the council, there's no matters from the economic development side of the staff. I don't know if Director Cho has anything.
Thank you. Director Cho, are you?
Yes, thank you, Counselor. No, there's nothing from community health and safety either.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Any matters from members of the committee? None? Matters from the chair, I have none, and our next meeting will be on Wednesday, March 2nd, and at 6:05, we are adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.